This is Corolla DeVille, and you're watching Inkwife TV. This is my client, Mr. Josh, and he wanted to cover up this partial flag tattoo that he had on his shoulder with skulls and watercolor roses. And this is eventually going to be a full sleeve, but for this little, for today's video, and for this little video series on the cover-up, it's only going to be the top portion. I'm going to complete the top portion before I travel down his arm because I just like to see a cover-up finished, you know. I put a skull on the back portion of his shoulder because I'm going to use the shadows in the skull to cover up the flag, and I put a skull facing on the front and a rose on the front of his shoulder and on the back of his arm. And after getting that stencil on, oh, and I wanted one more leaf at the bottom just to bring it down, and we were ready to get started. To begin the tattoo, I outlined the entire stencil very, very lightly. I was using my 5-round liner and using straight black ink, but the machine was only running at about 5.4 or 5.5 volts, so it wasn't sinking really deep into the skin, and I just needed a light peppered outline along the whole thing to let me know where all of the shapes are. Here you can see that I'm showing you how fast I'm running in normal time. Everything else in the video pretty much is sped up, but this is the pace that I'm actually running. I'm pretty slow, but the machine is not running hard, so my lines are not going to be real bold and dark. It took me about 1 hour to outline the whole thing, if that gives you an idea of how quickly the process took. And 1 hour, in my opinion, is not a long time to outline something of this size. I move slowly, but my lines are firm and set in at exactly the darkness or lightness that I want them to, so I don't have to try over and over again. You know, that's why the process, in my opinion, is efficient. Once I had finished outlining the skulls, I went in for the outlines of the roses. I was a little more careful on the rose outlines, as I wanted some of the lines to be very, very heavy and to look like they were a paint splatter on some of the edges, but most of the edges of the petals I wanted to be very translucent. The flowers, the roses, as I had said before, are going to be watercolored, and so this inky splatter on the outer edge helped with that effect. When it came to tattooing the rose on the back of the arm, it was inconvenient, and you can't really see what's going on anyway, so we're gonna skip ahead now. The next thing to do was to put some shadows on the large skull up on the shoulder. Now, I could have dedicated this whole first session to mapping out his entire arm, but because it's all going to be roses and watercolor roses and skulls, I did not feel that I had to do the entire map of his arm at one time. Sometimes with a full sleeve, you've got to map it all out in one go, but on something like this where we're just kind of create as we go along, I felt it was important to let the client leave with one good portion of his tattoo looking done, so that he could show people and say, yes, this is obviously a cover-up. Look here, this portion is done, this portion is not. But I just feel that for my morale and the client's morale, I like it when they leave and at least one portion of their tattoo looks done, so they know that they've got something really good to look forward to. Now it was time to put some shadows behind the jaw of the skull so that it would have a little bit of definition. In case you're wondering, I am using a 23 curved mag, running it at about 5 volts. And most of what I'm shading with is just straight black. Because this is a cover-up, the dark areas really do need to be dark. I am dipping back and forth between a black and a gray wash when I want part of it to be more translucent, but most of it is just with black. To get the shape of the flag to begin to disappear behind the skull, I had to draw the shapes of the skull that I wanted in there. Now, this flag really works pretty well behind a skull with the way that the lines are going, because, you know, skulls have cracks in them, and while I am going to get rid of the lines from the flag as much as I can, I know in the back of my head that if something shows through a little bit, by the time this is done, no one will ever notice. They will just assume that it's something blended into the skull and it's some detail on it, but I will still try to get it gone as much as is humanly possible. Most of it will be gone by the end of this session. It will still be slightly translucent, but with cover-ups, I feel that it takes 2 sessions to do a good job, minimum. 2 sessions over the cover-up portions of the tattoo where you're really trying to make the old design disappear. Now, because the backside of the skull was so very dark in order to be used as a cover-up, the front side of it needed to be pretty dark too, so I had to lay some heavy shadows in there to make the front match up with the back portion of the tattoo. You can't make just the cover-up part dark and the rest of it lighter. You have to make sure that you keep your darknesses the same and consistent all the way across your tattoo. Otherwise, it'll just look like it's a cover-up. Once I get the shadows up onto the skull, I will be ready to start dropping in some true gray. Now that all of the gray wash has been put in, I began putting in some true gray, like I said before. I used a cap of dark gray and light gray, and then I set aside a cap of white ink to the side as well, and I dipped back and forth between the dark and light gray and white to create however dark of gray ink that I wanted to be using in the skull. One reason that I have to use this gray ink in the skull is because it will lighten some of the tattoo that is in the background, especially the portions that are dark in places that I find inconvenient. They're dark in places where I don't want it to be dark anymore. So the gray will lighten that area. The other thing that the gray provides is it creates an even tone all the way across the tattoo. Because there's faded tattoo in the background of part of the skull, it's going to naturally have more of a gray tone because the old tattoo is a faded ink. If I want the rest of the skull to match, I have to put that gray into the remainder of it as well. So I needed to include it in the teeth and all up on the face and around on the forehead. You can see how my gray is slightly lightening those dark patches on the bottom, and it's given the skull some more shape as well. When I go back in for session 2, I'll use some gray in parts of this skull a second time to really make those inconvenient shadows in the background disappear. The last portion of this session I get to put in the white ink, and that's pretty much my favorite part. I feel like that's when it really starts to come to life, is when you get those spectacular highlights put on the tattoo at the very end. To do this, I am using an 11 hollow liner, and I'm running the machine at about probably right around 5 volts, same as I was shading with, I bet. The needle though is not hitting the skin very hard at all, so that puts the ink very, very high on top of the other ink that has been put in, so that it will rest and heal on the top, not mashed up all into the dark ink that has been applied before. Here you can see the regular speed that I'm actually tattooing at. I'm still going really slow, but you can see when I wipe, that white shows up. And when I tattoo and put whites in this way, they tend to heal and to stay very, very well. In that second session, I will definitely be putting a second layer of highlights on there, because when you do that, it just comes out so much more bright. Really, guys, it's worth it for cover-ups. Definitely, you've got to do 2 sessions and 2 good layers, unless it's a really, really light tattoo to begin with. Then you can cover it at one time. But in most cases, it's going to take 2 sessions to get it looking really well. A few more highlights on the skull for texture, and we are done. So if you remember, here is what we started with, and here is where we are today. You can still see a little bit of that flag behind the skull, but we will be taking care of that in session 2. We'll have another video out on this tattoo in about 2 months. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you later.